Coming up on this last episode of Tech News Weekly for the year 2019, we take a look back at this year and pull out a few of our favorite interviews, Mikah and I. 4 of the greatest interviews, in our opinion, from this year on Tech News Weekly. That's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 113, recorded December 12th for Thursday, December 26th, 2019.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news.
Yeah, we do.
We do that, and I do that as Mikah Sargent.
I do that starring as Jason Howell. You don't know my real name.
He's a star.
So how was Christmas? Did you celebrate?
I had the best time. There were Yuletide carols being sung by a choir.
Yeah.
Folks dressed up like mistletoe.
Okay.
Not that other thing, because that's actually not a thing we say anymore.
Okay.
As well as gingerbread cookies.
Yeah. Did you let it snow? Let it snow, let it snow?
I did, and it was the first Noel.
Oh,
yeah.
That's delightful.
Thank you.
Well, you've got the Christmas glow about you.
Oh.
So,
red, green, holly jolly. You as well. Yours is a Hawaiian Christmas glow, but
thank you. Yeah, for some reason, 3 weeks later, my Hawaiian glow is still with me.
The magic and mystery of recording.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we totally let you know that we recorded this early in the intro, so there's no keeping secrets from you guys. But this is our best of. So we are not in this week. The Twit studio is dark.
Yeah, we are not in the studio.
Right. We are still alive. We are living. We are just not here recording a show.
Well, one hopes.
That's true. We don't actually know that.
Yeah.
This could be our swan song.
Although I experience all times at once. I'm a little Dr. Manhattan in that way.
Ah, you're one of
so
those.
I am celebrating Christmas at this moment, and I am here with you in studio on December 12th.
Okay, this is where you lost me.
Okay.
Micah. I don't understand you anymore.
That's fine. No one does.
So we picked out a couple of really great interviews for you from throughout the year. It can be one of those little transitions. We'll leave that up to John to figure out. Starting with this one, episode 69. Do you remember, Micah, back in February when you weren't on the show yet? Mm-hmm. Wait,
was Megan Maroney there?
Yeah. Were you Megan Maroney?
I am Megan Maroney. It is episode 69.
Megan Maroney was sitting right there. I'm still not certain that it wasn't Micah, actually. But anyways, Megan and I talked with Cal Newport, author of the book Digital Minimalism, where we talked about our life of always on, always connected technology companions and how we can recover from that life.
The news on tech addiction has been rising. It's been a rising chorus for a while now, but just in the last year, the people questioning our overuse of technology are often the people who understand the technology the most. One of those voices is Cal Newport, professor of computer science at Georgetown University and author of the new book, Digital Minimalism, Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. So, your new book was released this week, but you've been working on this idea of the importance of focus for a while now. Talk a little bit about when you first started getting interested in this idea, the importance of just being more focused.
Well, as an academic computer scientist, and in particular a theoretician, throughout all of my training, I had been exposed to people who took concentration very seriously. This was a primary skill, and what they did was being able to stare at a whiteboard and try to solve a theorem. Now, somewhere around 2014, when I first began working on my last book, Deep Work, is when I began to notice as I researched more that focus is not just important for eccentric computer scientists like me who stare at whiteboards, but was becoming a tier 1 skill in the knowledge economy in general.
And so you recently wrote a piece in the New York Times called "Steve Jobs Never Wanted Us to Use Our iPhones Like This." How did he want us to use them? Because I guess I'm doing it wrong.
Well, I mean, Steve Jobs was a minimalist, and to him, he liked to take activities that were meaningful and try to make the experience even better. Right. So if you go back and talk to, as I did, some of the original engineers involved with the original iPhone development, or watch Steve Jobs' original keynote address at Macworld in 2007, it's pretty clear that the goal for the original iPhone was twofold. One, to build the best iPod they had ever built, and two, to combine that iPod with the best phone that had ever been built. It takes about 30 minutes into his keynote address before Jobs even really talks about internet connectivity or apps. And as the engineer I talked to confirmed, Jobs really saw this as a phone that was also an iPod, and it made both of those experiences really good. So he was trying to take things that people already really liked, making phone calls and listening to music, and bring those experiences to the next level. He never had in his mind this notion that it would become a constant companion that you were checking all day long, like an air traffic controller, furiously taking in information, sending information out. He wasn't trying to change the way we lived. He was just trying to take things that we really enjoyed and make those experiences even more enjoyable.
Yeah, it seems to me that the turning point from kind of like the Steve Jobs, let's say, minimalist compared to today's standards anyways, of what you would do with an iPhone into this like digital companion role was the kind of introduction of the App Store. And, once the App Store happened, everybody had a reason, to create something that they could put in front of you and get you to use it all the time. Would you kind of agree that was like the big turning point? Is there any way to turn back around?
Well, the App Store opened the door. And Jobs was very worried about the App Store at first, mainly because he thought that third-party apps would be inelegant and not use the features well and maybe crash the phone at bad times. But what really shifted the phone into the constant companion mold was when the major social media platforms, and in particular Facebook, who was early to this, needed to get those revenue numbers up. They had to get the revenue numbers up for their IPO, and this is where they really began to re-engineer the social media experience so that it became something in which you were getting this constant stream of social approval indicators that made it very difficult to resist compulsively clicking on the app. So the apps gave us a lot more to do on the phone, but it was social media doing attention engineering that I think really pushed us into our current world where we can't look away from the screen.
Yeah, so there's really two parts to this. That kind of I want attention. I want people to like all my stuff, and so I keep going back to the device and losing attention. How can I stop this? You have the 30-day. I have your book right here. You have the 30-day digital declutter. What? Give us a high level of what that is. I need it.
Well, I think when it comes to digital technology in our personal lives, we essentially need to start from scratch, right? We've just ended this 10-year period that maybe begins with the iPhone, which was a lot of exuberance and excitement around all these new technologies. We signed up for things haphazardly. A lot of the experiences that we signed up for were re-engineered at some point to become more addictive. And so what I'm recommending is that people step back, clear all this clutter out of their digital life, and then rebuild it from scratch much more intentionally. Say, okay, let's start over. What do I really care about? What do I actually want to spend time on? And now, how do I intentionally deploy technology to help these things that really matter, right? That's the minimalist approach to technology, as opposed to the maximalist option, which is just, if there's any case that this could be useful or convenient, I should probably download it.
Mm-hmm. Or if the notifications, that's my thing. It's like, oh yeah, I guess I should allow notifications because I might want them someday, but really I should go the other way and turn them all off and turn them back on if I really need them.
Yeah, but I go even farther, say delete it all. Like, so the 30 days is take it all off for 30 days, clear your palette, get rid of the compulsive use to use the phone. And then after the 30 days, say, okay, what do I want to add back, and be very intentional when you do it. So digital minimalists, for the most part, they use tech to great advantage, but they use a lot less than most other people are doing. And so they're looking at their screens a lot less and tend to be enjoying their life a lot more. They're just a lot smarter about their relationship with technology.
So I completely understand, and I adopt, certain aspects of what you're talking about as far as returning to more of a real world life, realizing that over the years I got super consumed with my social media and keeping it all up to date, and then realizing I was just distracting myself to death. But what if real world life is actually transforming, and in doing this, we're actually kind of more putting our head in the sand than we are kind of moving with the stream, moving with the flow of the way things are?
Well, I mean, I've heard this storyline before, that essentially this constant companion model where we're constantly looking at a screen and more of our life is mediated through a virtual world, that somehow this is just fundamental to what it means to live in the 21st century. But if you look deeper at it, where did this behavior come from? Who is it benefiting? It becomes pretty clear that there's nothing fundamental about this. In fact, a large portion of this behavior of constantly looking at the screen is just basically a mechanism to alchemize our time and attention into stock price. And so I'm a big believer that a lot of what we're doing now that's starting to make people uneasy is recent and arbitrary. For the most part, a lot of it's not in the interest of the user, and we have a lot more flexibility to reimagine our relationship with these tools than we suspect. So I don't think what we're seeing now is the first step in an evolution towards a new type of digital existence. I think what we're seeing now instead is a period of initial exuberance where we probably went too far and companies probably got too aggressive about trying to monetize us, from which we're going to regress back towards a much more sustainable mean.
Yeah. You're the second college professor we've talked to in this show, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked him, which I now realize probably everyone asks you this because we all want to know, the children are our future. But when you see students coming in, are you seeing a change in attention spans, or are they actually more aware of the idea that our attention is a commodity and, especially if we're going into computer science, we need to take better care of it?
Both things are happening. So Generation Z, which is this first generation to have access to smartphones and social media starting in their early adolescence, they're getting hit really hard by this. And we see this most strikingly in the mental health statistics, where we see this very sharp hockey stick-like rise in the graph of anxiety and anxiety-related disorders, as well as accompanying hospitalizations for self-harm and suicide attempts. This goes right up as soon as social media and smartphones are available at a young age. So this has been a problem for young people. But the thing I'm hearing from these same young people is that they know this. And there's almost like a revolt that's beginning to emerge from the bottom up because they're so savvy. They're not that happy with this idea that, these three executives are manipulating all of their time and attention to try to keep them using Snapchat or keeping Snapchat streaks alive or whatever it is that's keeping them glued to their phones and away from real life. And so I'm sensing that there's a real hunger out there among young people for something different. They know that it's a problem. They know that they're getting hit harder than other people because they don't have a memory of life before these things like the rest of us do. But we have this shift that's happened in the last few years where they're starting to notice that. And so we have this sort of emergent result starting in people's teenage years where they're saying, I'm not so sure about me being in my room with this screen all the time as if this is what I really want to do. So I'm a little bit optimistic about seeing some change here.
Nice. I like hearing you say that. One of the things in your book, one of the things that you spent some time on is this idea of leisure time, of kind of like me time, right? Like blocking everything out, actually giving yourself the moment to be silent and be one with yourself, and to have actual true leisure time. And what struck me about that was just this idea that I think a lot of people would look at technology and they would define leisure time around that, right? Like they would say, well, that is my leisure time. My leisure time involves technology. What would you say to that?
Well, something I discovered researching the book is that we have a real need as humans for what I call high-quality analog leisure. So typically activities that require some sort of actual skill, something you get better at as the skill gets better, that also involves you interacting with the real world around you. Right? This is what our brain has evolved to expect, is that we manipulate the world, let's say, with our hands, and our intentions are manifested concretely. This is a huge source of satisfaction. It's a big part of human flourishing. And if you replace this all with digital leisure activities, you're at a large loss. There's something fundamental about the concrete world that our mind has learned to expect. It's what we've evolved to want to try to manipulate. And we do not understand lights moving on a screen in the same way that we understand picking this thing up, chipping the thing off the rock, making the spear, being able to throw the spear, seeing it going into the mastodon, those sort of proverbial caveman activities. And so I've been a big advocate for getting high quality analog leisure back into your life, not allowing the digital stream to eat up every last free scrap of leisure time that you have. And when the people I've worked with have made the shift, their quality of life, their self-reported quality of life has really gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in Georgetown, very close to in D.C. Do you think that regulation has any part in this, or is this really just like a personal choice in how we change our own lives, or should the companies be regulating this, or should the government be regulating this?
Well, I'll say I don't take that option off the table, but I'm yet to see a proposal for regulation that's going to have the type of sweeping effect that I think we need. And so at the moment, at least until I hear something that seems like it's a better idea, I think our best shot for trying to actually increase the quality of life in our culture is probably going to be cultural changes. I think as people step back and say, the constant companion model of smartphone use is not fundamental to our current technological age. It's not fundamental to how we live. It's not fundamental to extracting the most value out of modern innovations. It is an arbitrary contrivance that helps a small number of companies make more money. I think our culture understanding that and stepping back and saying, okay, I am now going to treat tech tools like I treat any other tool I own, something I deploy to help me with things that I really care about. If we can make that shift, we're going to have huge positive changes. And I don't see how we get there with any sort of legislation alone.
It's so interesting because 2 decades ago when I started or more in technology, the idea was like to teach kids that technology is a toy. Like when it's a tool, you'll never get them to love it. Like you'll never turn, your child into a computer scientist if they're just looking at these as tools. They need to look at them as toys. But now it's sort of flipped. The idea really is flipped. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Cal Newport is an associate professor of computer science at Georgetown University and the author of 6 books, including Digital Minimalism, Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World.
Well, you know what? It's pretty nosy as well. Let's be honest. The data brokers are very nosy.
It was released this week by Penguin Random House. And I always thank people for their time, but I want to especially thank you for your time because I know that you're so mindful of who you give it to. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you, Cal. Wasn't that great?
Yes.
I don't know how funny it was, but it was great.
I laugh because I love.
Oh, okay. All right. That works.
Yeah.
That works. This next one, actually, I got a big kick out of. I used to work at CNET before my days at Twit. And one of the guys that I used to work with a lot, Brian Cooley, he's just an awesome guy, super funny. In episode 77, I had the chance to bring him on Tech News Weekly. Megan, I believe, was out at this time. But this was back in April. I chatted with Brian Cooley, who was one of the first to taste the Impossible Whopper made with the Impossible Meat 2.0. It's kind of like the meat that's kind of technology in how they update it. It's not technology at all.
I've had several of those, not from Burger King, but I've had several of those burgers that I made myself, and they're very good.
Okay. Well, then you should try Burger King.
Never.
Brian Cooley did, and that's right now. He's going to tell you all about it. Earlier this year at the Consumer Electronics Show, Impossible, which is the company responsible for the Impossible Burger, held an event where it introduced people to the next major revision of their meatless burger meat. I love how it's kind of like a technology upgrade, yet it's food. This would be the Impossible Burger 2.0. It really seemed like they'd done impossible, creating a convincing food product in look, taste, and texture. I got a facepalm from Burke on that one. Well, now American fast food chain Burger King is bringing the Impossible Burger into the chain's menu, apparently. Brian Cooley from CNET is here to tell us what to expect. You're a brave man, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason. How are you?
It's great to see you, man. It's been too long.
I know. It's been a while.
So first things first, when was the last time you actually went into a Burger King before this taste test?
Oh, it's been ages. Probably a couple decades. It's been a long time.
Couple of decades before stepping foot into a Burger King, and then Impossible Burger shows up, and I'm fascinated by this idea of I feel like I can speak for myself personally as far as fast food is concerned, and specifically something like Burger King. When I was a kid, I was all about it. I went to Burger King with my kids a couple of years ago because they were super fascinated by it, and so I was like, fine, I'll take you there one time. It was one of the more disgusting meals I've ever had. So is this the kind of thing that brings people back into fast food that had already written it off? I guess that's what Impossible Burger is hoping for.
It actually doesn't, because what it does is it so closely replicates exactly what you had last time you were there having a regular Whopper. So if you don't like the idea of a Whopper, if you don't like all that stuff, I mean, I was surprised. I guess I'd forgotten how laden fast food burgers are with lettuce and mayo and special sauce and that wet, soggy tomato. And it was, you can kind of see right there, it's kind of a wet mess, right? I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff. Pickles, I left out the pickles. There's a lot going on there. And then you get to the burger right before you get to the basement and the bottom of the bun. So, that's distracting a bit from the patty itself, which is part of the story here. This is different than, let's say, the future, which is going to be some new products that will be plant-based or cellular-grown steak, which is a product that arrives by itself unadorned. I think burgers are a little easier to nail because they are buried in other stuff. But whether that's here nor there, that is an exceedingly good analog, the Impossible Burger, for a beef burger. The story is there's kind of no story here. It's extremely faithful to what you're used to.
Wow, which is saying something. I believe, man, I think we had Russell Hawley from Mobile Nations on a few months ago when he was at CES, and he tried the Impossible Burger 2.0. And I guess I'm fascinated with the Impossible Burger because I've never had it, but I like to talk to people who have. But he tried the 2.0, and he said, like, it's so convincing that it could absolutely, for him, replace burger and replace true burger meat in his diet. So I guess it makes sense that a place like Burger King would actually attempt to try this out. Now, what exactly makes up the Impossible Burger that's different from some of the other stuff you were just talking about?
Well, you mentioned the 2.0 formula that came out at CES. Again, a tech announcement. And I think they're credibly a tech company. It's not just being cute because what they're doing is they're reformulating something. What they're doing is what all great tech companies do. They're taking an existing human appetite or need, literally an appetite, and they're trying to come up with what at least they think is a better way to solve that need that is more technically advanced, more efficient, smarter in many ways. And so what they've done here with the 2.0 formula, as I understand it, is they went from a wheat protein-based patty in their 1.0 to a soy protein-based patty. So that's a big shift right there. But also with the other sorts of ingredients that go in there, they've also worked hard to make it more amenable to the kind of machine we're looking at there, the grill. That's called a conveyor broiler, I learned, not a grill. And what it does is, yes, grill the patties, but it moves them through at a very high heat, 630 degrees for 2 minutes and 35 seconds. And then at the end, they drop about 6 inches down this little chute. And we've seen this in fast food restaurants if you look in the back and while you're waiting for your order. Yep. And it was one of the hardest things they had to do was to make sure the patty was formulated in a way that it didn't break up as it fell down the chute and as it was put into what they call a hot holding tray, which is where they put cooked patties before your order is actually ready to be made. These are the physical challenges they had to come up and solve with their formulation. They already had nailed, I think, taste and texture. A lot of it was about handleability in a restaurant or mass production food setting.
So these are different. So then in that case, these are different from what some of the people at CES were trying. They might taste the same, but they're more durable.
Oh, yeah. In a sense, these are different because what they've done here is this is the 2.0 at CES. What they did different for Burger King, though, is they did get the diameter exactly right, as you can see, and they got the thickness exactly right. So they have very little shrinkage on this product. It's not one that gets dramatically smaller like a typical 80-20 ground beef patty. It goes in at one diameter and it comes out that diameter. Ditto for the thickness. So they had to get that exactly right and realize that we have to work the cooking process to make sure we know that we're not counting on shrinkage to fit the bun, because one of the biggest things that they heard from Burger King is we cannot have this thing smaller than the bun. We're not changing the bun. A Whopper is a Whopper. So therefore, do not give us a patty. It's going to yield a burger where occasionally the customer is going to come up with a big old mouthful of nothing but bread, lettuce, and mayo. That's not what they're looking for. So one of the keys here was literally the physical engineering of it. The formulation was already going that way as of January.
And so the story around how these two kind of came to be, it really sounds like much of the work was on Impossible getting their burger to match the equipment that Burger King already had, which makes me wonder, are the actual burger patties being cooked in the same machines as the Impossible burger patties?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Perhaps they're on a different temperature and time. That sounds unlikely, though. I suspect they had to form this to make sure it's going to go through the same conveyor broiler. I can't see a Burger King restaurant adding another, what has to be a multi-$1,000 machine and another natural gas hookup. So, no, these must be going through the same path. I'm not sure of that, but I suspect they're going the same cooking path and the same build process, as they call it. That's when they get them on the counter and they're pulling ingredients together and they're building the sandwich as a traditional animal patty.
Yeah, and I would imagine that would be the case too. What I think would maybe be a roadblock for some people is that some people would want to get the Impossible Burger because it's not meat, and let's say they're vegetarian. Even though I know that Impossible's mission isn't necessarily to cater directly to vegetarians, but to replace meat for people who already eat meat. But knowing that they're not using separate, machines, people get very tricky around that. Knowing that, hey, I want this meatless product made in a meatless
very strict
machine.
Vegans are going to perhaps have an issue if they learn that there is this thing being cooked on the same grill as an animal product that's going in around the same time. That's a very small market, to be honest.
That's true.
This is going to be something where I think Burger King is aiming, obviously, for big market. They're not doing this to do something niche. That's not the business they're in. I think what's happened here is they got comfortable over the last year, I think, negotiating and talking with Impossible to say, okay, I think you guys at Impossible have solved more or less for taste and texture. There will always be folks that say, A, if it ain't animal, I'm not eating it. B, I don't like new food. C, I don't like food that has technology. There's all those communities that will just reject this thing out of hand. But I think for a big lobe in the middle of Burger King's market, BK has realized, you know what? This nails taste and texture good enough. Let's now embrace it, and we can apply the three things that we're really good at as a big chain, which is to work on affordability, accessibility, and acceptability. Get the price, even though it's $1 more right now, but eventually they want to erase that. Get the price where it's accessible. Get the availability. That's what they can do with 7,000 restaurants. And get the acceptability, which is to market the hell out of this thing, to make it mainstream by the sheer force of their brand and their media spending around it. And that is something that they can do that upstart food companies can't.
Yeah, and I mean, before this, I think, at least here in the Bay Area, I would hear from people who went, hey, this restaurant has the Impossible Burger, it'd be very, it would be interesting that there were places that had it, and it was kind of a selling point. It was a reason for someone to go there. When you're talking about a fast food chain like Burger King, this is awareness through the roof for the brand. So this is just huge for Impossible.
And it'll hopefully start to move, for these companies that are doing this, start to move these products from being hard to attain to being easy to find. Because right now, Beyond Burgers, which is a competitor, they're pretty commonly found, at least in Bay Area grocery stores. But they also make a sausage that is like, it's a joke. I mean, here in the Bay Area, it's a game trying to find them. They sell out so fast, and their production is not yet caught up with demand, that it is a thing where people talk to their friend, did you find sausage somewhere? Did Whole Foods have them? No, they were sold out. And so this is not good for a product. It's fun at first. It's great buzz. And then it gets real old real fast. And consumers say, enough. I'm not going to play games to find your product. That's where you've got to go mainstream really fast after your hard to find buzz period.
Yeah, maybe they need to adopt the Snap Spectacles strategy and just
no
drop
one needs to adopt Snap Spectacles.
I'm sorry, that was a bad idea. That's why I'm not in marketing. But what about competitors? McDonald's doesn't really have anything like this. I know you mentioned in your write-up, Carl's Jr. has the Beyond Meat burgers. I don't know if you've tried those. These are just
Carl's
all restaurants that I never go to. But what about
Carl's
McDonald's?
has Beyond since top of the year in all of their restaurants. It's only 1,100 restaurants, so Burger King is 7 times that big, and McDonald's is so much bigger than anybody else. It's not even close. I was looking at some numbers for we pulled this story together. McDonald's does, let's see, they've got 14,000 locations. So that is twice as many as Burger King, and they do a whole lot more revenue per location. So this is just a much bigger business when you talk about McDonald's. So far, they have done what's called the McVegan in Finland and Sweden, and I don't think it's been a huge success there. And it's not even trying to be like beef. It is trying to be an alternate patty that very much, as I understand it, I haven't tried it, says vegetable. And they also have something in the UK, which I have tried when I've been over there in their London market, and they've got something called the Vegetable Deluxe, which is quite disgusting. It's just
disgusting.
It's this messy. Yeah, it's that thing there. It's these two vegetable. I don't know what these even are. They call them vegetable goujons,
sticks.
And they're just they're vegetable sticks, and they're full of vegetable, which is fine. Except that's not what the market's looking for when you're trying to nail burgers directly.
Yeah.
So I think McDonald's needs to get off the sticks sometime. I would have to think this year they need to get on stream, because some of their smaller competitors are stealing the buzz and the sort of thought leadership, if I can use that term, around a product that is hitting to a number of bases about environmental, animal, and human health benefits.
Well, I will admit, starting this interview, I thought I was going to end this interview being really hungry, and I think I'm the opposite. And it's lunchtime.
You ended on those McDonald's things. That's why. If you ended on the Impossible or the Beyond over at Carl's, I think you might have a little more salivation going on.
Maybe a little bit. I guess at the end of the day, like, I don't know the last time you had a Whopper, but you just had one. You kind of said it's the same as before, just with a replacement beef. Would you go back and get it again, or are you done?
Now, you know what I'm really looking forward to? Yeah, is fast food chains having these widely available. I mean, no one has it widely available. Carl's is it. I mean, but Carl's are not that common, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else, White Castle's 377 locations, and not nationwide. They've got it as well. So this has not yet hit mainstream availability. And for people who want to be flexitarians, which is the main market this is going after, not vegetarian, not vegan, but the flexitarian who opts in and out of meat-based products, that's where you've got to make it easy. People are not going to drive out of their way if they're flexitarian. I would say they are a less mentally rigid, committed crowd than the vegetarian or the vegan. So you got to meet flexitarians where they live, where the vegetarian or the vegan who's really leaning into this will go more out of their way, I think, to find their particular food choices.
You are a think-fluencer, but you are also a taste-fluencer, Brian
Wow,
Cooley.
I just got 2 new upgrades.
Yes, you are duo-fluencered. Brian Cooley with CNET. Brian, it's great to see you again, man. Thank you so
Jason.
much for hopping
Thanks
on
for
with
having me on the show. Appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon. Maybe we'll get lunch at Burger King someday.
Oh, man. Can you imagine?
Oh, I can't.
Burger
No.
King.
That's.
Oof.
I still haven't. Although I know Burke here at the studio. Every once in a while, I see him, and John's giving a thumbs up right now.
To a Burger King? They've got like grade D meat, right?
Well, but it's impossible meat.
Well,
so
that's true.
So I don't know what you grade that.
It's impossible to grade.
Then you're grading. Then you're grading the veggies and the other stuff that
the
they
soy
put on.
protein isolates.
I don't know where you get with that one. But anyways, I'm not going to try it anytime soon.
Yeah, but you should try an Impossible Burger.
Okay.
You know what? Maybe I'll make you one.
Okay, I would love that.
It's only like $16 for 2 or something. No, it's not that expensive, but it is kind of pricey. I think it's like $8.
Someday.
Speaking of none of those things.
Okay, yeah,
like that
good
one?
transition.
Yeah,
Like
thank
it.
you. On episode 97 in August, I was here.
Yeah, that's right. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Micah.
Thank
it's
you very
nice to have
much.
you on the show.
You know, I
today and for
appreciate
the rest of
it,
the
Jason.
show.
All the rest of the show and that show,
Into
episode
existence.
97,
Yes.
when it was on in August, where we talked to Rose Eveleth from Slate about how tech patent news, honestly, not as informative and sort of crystal ball-like as we had once hoped or expected. I learned a lot on that episode. Mm-hmm. This whole time I'm seeing these, Apple's working on this. Ooh, Google's working on this.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? Turns out it doesn't mean a whole lot, darn it. And Rose crushed my dreams and built me back up as a better human being. So check this out. Now, if you've spent any time looking at tech news, you've certainly come across a headline or two that claims a tech company is working on bizarre, futuristic, or seemingly impossible products. But if you take the time to view the article, you discover their source, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Tech patents make for great headlines, sure, but Rose Eveleth of Slate is here to give us a little more information about these black and white and diagrammed all over documents. Hello, Rose.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to kick things off. You wrote, Understanding Patents offers a window not just into the labyrinthine world of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and its potential failings, but also into how companies think about the future. So let's start there. Can you explain why patents are sort of a glimpse into a company's psyche?
Sure. So, companies file patents for things, even if they're not sure they're going to use them. Patents get filed really early in the process, just in case. And so often they aren't necessarily a reflection of what the company is making day to day, but instead sort of the problems that they're thinking about and some of the solutions they might be considering using to solve those problems. And so it's really more, I think, a glimpse into kind of like, what are the big questions that they're coming to their engineers and saying, like, we got to figure this out. Let's brainstorm, let's figure out what to do. And so you see these patents, and some of them seem kind of weird, some of them seem kind of funny. People love to make fun of patents, like you said. There's so many articles, and it's sort of a pet peeve of mine where like tech reporters will be like, Facebook is doing this thing. And if you look at it, Facebook's not actually doing that thing. They simply filed a patent that like maybe kind of talks about that thing. But it is a good way to kind of see what Facebook is worrying about or what Amazon is worrying about or Sony or whatever company you want to look at.
Yeah. So going on with that, we talk a lot about media literacy as a whole and how important that is. And I was hoping, one of the things you mentioned is that claims are the most important part of a patent. So for the listeners out there, and for me as well, could you give us some tips on sort of patent literacy? What should we be looking for if we want to go past the headline and understand how to sort of break apart a patent?
Sure. I should caveat this by saying that I am not a lawyer. So if you have real patent law questions, you should absolutely consult a lawyer. But, I think that the thing that people love to jump on top of with patents is the pictures. And I too, they're great. They're delightful. But the pictures don't really matter that much in terms of what the patent is actually saying. The thing that matters is the claims. And the claims are the thing that the patent is saying, this is the thing that's original. This is the thing that doesn't exist in the world. And that I am kind of giving to the U.S. Patent Office in order to get protection back, right? So the whole deal with patents is that you tell the world how this great invention that you've come up with works, and you share that information with the United States, with the world, and that's great for everybody. And then the U.S. in return gives you protection on that patent for 20 years of the term, assuming you maintain the patent through its life. And so, that is the claims are what you are saying, this is the actual invention. This is the actual thing that I have come up with. Everything else is kind of trappings to that. And they can be important. And, the other things that are in the patent are useful information. But if you really want to know what a patent is about and what they are actually kind of saying that they have invented, the claims are the thing that you want to read. Now, like any technical document, there are pieces of jargon and there are weird ins and outs of claims. In the piece for Slate, I talked a little about prophetic examples.
Yes.
So you can actually sort of make things up in a patent that you don't have to necessarily have done the experiments. You can just say this experiment shows blank thing, that this totally works, the thing that I've invented, and that can be untrue. So there are weird things about patents, and it's not your fault if you get confused reading a patent if you're just a regular person like you or me. But if you do really want to kind of dive in, if you see a tech headline or you read something and you're like, that sounds weird, the place to go is the claims.
So what kind of struck me in reading through the piece, I thought it was fascinating because, so many, on the shows that I do here, that we do here, that I'm definitely totally guilty of oh my goodness, they're working on that patent, because it's just so easy to get entranced by it because they're usually very creative and often they are very different from what we're used to seeing, or maybe they're an extension of what we're used to seeing, almost to a ridiculous point. And so it's very easy to want to get excited about that. But if they so easily stifle innovation, if they are truly just, we run a company and we want to file all these patents to make sure that the other people don't do these things, we have no intention of doing them, it just seems like so much of the innovation around these ideas ends up just kind of falling flat because they're using it as weapons instead of using them as real ideas to become something someday. What do you think about that? Is that unfair? It feels unfair to me that no one would be able to tap into that.
I think this is a huge debate among the patent world, and especially the tech patent world. And in different realms, I think the answer is slightly different, right? So you have technology patents, you have software patents, you have things like pharmaceutical patents and biotechnology patents, and it's a little bit different in each place. I think that, in theory, that it's not necessarily fair to say to a company, you can only patent things that you're going to use. Because most companies are patenting things long before they might wind up using them. And that's fine. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that because like anything, you have a big problem to solve, right? Let's say you're Amazon and you really need to figure out how do we get all the stuff that we have to all the people who want it, right? That's a huge logistical supply chain problem. And there are going to be a ton of possible solutions here. And which solution is the right one kind of depends on what happens with lots of other things that you maybe don't have control over, like infrastructure and the economy and all of that stuff. So it makes sense to maybe go after a couple of different solutions that might be the one that you want to use. And I don't think it necessarily makes sense to say no, you can't do that. You can only patent something when you have officially decided that you want to use it. Because that kind of, defeats the purpose, especially even for a small, let's say you're not Amazon. Let's say you're just you or me and you come up with a genius invention. If you don't have the funds or the resources necessarily to prove that it works yet, but in your heart of hearts that it will, I don't think that it necessarily makes sense for the patent office, for the government to say no, you can't use it. You cannot patent that. That said, obviously, there's the flip side, right? There are what people call patent trolls. There are people who weaponize these intellectual property documents and go after people for infringing on patents that maybe are too broad or maybe shouldn't have been, implemented in the first place. So it is a balancing act, and I think it's really hard, right? Because the whole premise of the patent office is to protect inventors, right? To say like, in the old school kind of like, American way of like, you're in your garage and you've invented something and we're going to protect you and we're going to protect that invention. And that's important. And I think that's really great. The question then becomes like, how do we make sure that that piece of it is protected without kind of like getting overzealous and telling people they can't do certain things? It's really hard to balance those two things. I am glad that I don't have to make policy around this.
Yeah, no kidding.
Speaking of balancing those two things, something I found fascinating in your piece is that some companies choose not to file patents for the things that they are most focused on. Can you talk a little bit about why a company would be motivated to refrain from filing a patent?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously a patent is public, right? Anybody, you, me, any person with an internet connection, or even with just like, a letter in the mail can request information from the patent office and can, in theory, see how that thing works. Now, there are ways that companies can file patents and also still kind of protect what they're up to, right? So pharmaceutical patents are kind of a good example of this. Pharmaceutical companies will sometimes patent a bunch of formulas for a drug, and they know that only one of them actually works. But this is kind of a way to like obfuscate a little bit what they're doing while also getting the benefit of a patent. But other places, other companies, every company has a different strategy. And almost every giant tech company, or really any company at all, is going to have some kind of industry secret or trade secret that they protect, right? The classic example of this is like food formulas, right? Like, what is it that makes a Dorito? A Dorito is like an industry secret, and they're not going to patent that. And so it is kind of, you have to decide as a company, and every company has a different strategy, which pieces of your invention and innovation you want protection from for the patent office, and you want to maybe make sure that another company isn't doing, and which are important enough and sort of internal enough and secret enough that you don't necessarily want to share that with the world. So I think every company finds a balance in a different place on that, but almost every company that you have heard of that you use day to day, there are things that they do internally and processes and inventions and things that they do not patent because they don't necessarily want to tell people what they're up to.
Yeah, I think it was Elon Musk who said something along the lines of, we don't want to have a cookbook available for anybody to sort of go in and say, okay, this is how I make a SpaceX this or a SpaceX that, with diagrams, as we've talked about, and everything laid out. Although those diagrams, as you've said, are not that important, because sometimes you have a person standing up in front of a couch and shouting McDonald's. I want to talk about, one would think that the person that invents a thing is the person who's putting together the patent. But that's pretty much hardly ever true. It's the lawyer's job, and they get to be kind of, they're given the room to explore the space, as it were. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you mentioned prophetic examples, but I think it's really important to drive home the fact that you can pretty much lie in a patent about what might happen because of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some patents, they are filed by the inventor, maybe with the help of a lawyer, maybe not, but when we're talking about patents that this piece is about, which is the patents from big tech companies like, Amazon, Facebook, Sony, there are whole teams, there are whole patent law teams that they work with. And in that case, a lot of the time what happens is these inventors, the engineers, whoever it is within the company, meets with the patent lawyer. They talk about what that patent is about. They kind of give all the information that they can. Often they do give sketches and diagrams and things they've drawn up. And then it's really the patent lawyer's job to basically go out, take that information that they've collected and turn that into a patent. And what that means basically is taking this idea and imagining every possible way that the company might be able to use it. Because you want to make sure, if you're going to protect this idea, you want to make sure you're protecting every possible version of it. And patents are expensive to file. And so you want to really get the bang for your buck. And what that means is that, like I mentioned, a patent, you can patent something that does not work and that you have no proof that works. You can patent something that is just an idea, right? I think one of the patents that I mentioned in the piece is a patent for a cancer cure, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say doesn't work. But, it doesn't have to be proven, right? You can patent anything that you have a sort of reasonable idea or sort of like a thought about. And the patent office has to decide whether that's reasonable, and there's sorts of like ins and outs there. And there's a long conversation to be had about like the expertise of patent officers, which is a whole other question. But so if you're the lawyer and you then you're given this task and you go off and you make the patent, you draw the diagrams. There's a whole job that somebody does where their job is to just be a patent drawer, like a person who draws the illustrations for patents. I had no idea that was a job you could have. So, my high school guidance counselor did not tell me that one. And that's like a fun job, I think. But yeah, so like the lawyer is the one that kind of comes up with so many of the uses and so many of the examples. And it is kind of like writing science fiction. And the patent lawyers that I've talked to say it's really fun. And I believe them. It sounds so fun.
Yeah. So assuming that you don't go off and become a patent artist, I do want to thank you so much for joining us today, Rose. That was this whole article. Everybody should go read it. It was an incredible glimpse into everything to do with patents and sort of, like I said, a primer on what we need to know about patents. It's important. So where can people follow you online and hopefully one day see your patent diagrams?
Yes, my second career as a patent illustrator. I host a podcast called Flash Forward, which you can find on any podcasting app. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm Rose Eveleth on pretty much every social platform. For better or for worse, I'm the only Rose Eveleth in the world. So if you Google that, that's me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose. It was
Thanks
a pleasure.
for having me.
We'll talk to you
Thanks
soon.
for having me. This is fun.
You know what, Mikah? I learned a lot in that episode too. It crushed my desire to bring on any tech news stories that have anything to do with patents. Now, when I read a patent news story, I'm like, oh no, I remember that interview. This really doesn't.
Let me
mean
head
much.
to the comments.
I'm not going to fall for it this time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Never again.
Never again.
But this one is proof maybe that I was Megan Maroney.
Oh, okay.
Back in that episode.
Go on.
Because we didn't have some sort of tool to determine what deepfakes were.
That's true.
At the time. So episode 100 in September, Britt Paris, the co-author of the report Deepfakes and Cheap Fakes, which is just a great doggone name, talks about the systems designed to detect deepfakes and why they might not be effective in the long run. So deepfakes are a big concern, and this is what you need to know about them.
Technological boogeyman of the modern age appears to be deepfakes. On one hand, it's intriguing and powerful technology that's becoming rapidly democratized. On the other hand, the implications for the health of democracy itself, among other potentially damaging applications, can lead one down a path of fear and doubt, particularly as it improves with every passing day. This stuff's getting really good. The focus as of late has shifted towards accepting their place in modern technology, along with effective detection of deepfakes in order to limit the damage that could be inflicted by their negative applications. And joining us to talk about the systems that are being put into place to detect these deepfakes is Britt Paris, co-author of the new Data Society report titled Deepfakes and Cheap Fakes. Welcome, Britt.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to get you on. Thank you so much for carving out some time to talk with us today. So, personally, I'm fascinated by deepfakes. Anytime there's a new deepfake story making the rounds, I'm equally interested and fascinated, but also kind of slightly mortified of what could happen here. I'm aware of deepfakes. Your report is the first time that I personally heard the term cheap fakes. So, can you start by maybe sharing some of the major differences between the two?
Sure. So the report really looks at a broad range of audiovisual manipulation, or what we call audiovisual manipulation. So the deepfakes that we're all familiar with are artificial intelligence reliant techniques to graft faces, primarily faces, onto existing videos. But, it can also include voices or grafting faces onto already extant bodies and videos. Those are the deep fakes that we are aware of. But cheap fakes, the term that we coin or use to talk about or cheap fakes is what we use to talk about more conventional methods of audiovisual manipulation, like speeding up or slowing down footage, staging footage, or, having someone stand in for another person to recontextualize that footage. So these cheap fakes are the more accessible forms of audiovisual manipulation, and they're not, technically sophisticated, but they work to play with context. And like I say, they use lookalikes, stand-ins, relabeling footage of one event or one person as another. And through doing this, media creators, if we want to put it very loosely, can easily manipulate an audience's interpretation of these videos. Absolutely.
We're seeing this more and more. We're seeing it kind of in some many ways baked into, just every day. Like, so even social media products are starting to kind of head in these directions and do really kind of interesting manipulative visual effects like this. Now, you say that fakes and media are nothing new, which makes a lot of sense. But talk a little bit about the historical perspective here. Is now any different than the past? It really feels very potent right now, but is that any different?
In some ways it is, but in some ways, and it's an extension of, old struggles over power over evidence. So we talk about in the 1850s, whenever photography was invented and people were starting to think about using photographic evidence in court. And courts and judges mistrusted this technology because they didn't understand it. And they preferred to have someone stand in on a case-by-case basis to explain the technology and what they were seeing and what's being captured in the technology, really relied on these expert interpretations of these videos, which were obviously, often flawed. And then, we fast forward to the 1990s where broadcast media is complicit in recontextualizing or miscontextualizing or, sort of playing with evidence in a number of different ways. The example that we use is the Gulf War and coverage around the 1991 Gulf War, where broadcast media constructed this conflict that seemed like it was a conflict between evenly matched adversaries, but indeed it wasn't. But these were real images. But what was manipulative about them was that how they were contextualized, interpreted, and broadcast around the clock on television to uphold the political decisions of the government, the status quo. So that's sort of a quick overview of the history that we go over. There are a lot of other specific examples, but today we are able to manipulate videos and images using machine learning, and these results are now almost impossible to detect by the human eye. And now, anyone with a public social media profile is fair game to be faked. And once these fakes exist online, they can go viral on social media in a matter of seconds, and they're really hard to take down if that's something that's necessary.
So
there are some differences.
Speaking to that virality, I mean, do you sort of consider this part of the whole idea of a deep fake? Because a deep fake on its own that doesn't sort of have legs then just sort of disappears into the masses. So it's kind of like a positive and negative of the internet here. So when you talk about deep fakes, are you primarily talking about ones tied to the virality of being shared across the landscape? Those seem to be the ones that have more power, obviously. And is that kind of where the focus is on deepfakes, is getting a manipulated video out there and then making sure that it goes out to the audience? Or is it more of like a focused, less about the virality, but more about just like, oh, I want to create this video and I want to, share it as evidence in like a court, for example, versus social? So kind of, I know that question's a little confusing, but do we see it more as a method to share with the masses, or are these deepfakes kind of being used in smaller contexts more often?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And in the report, we talk about how faked images, deepfakes included, are interpreted as evidence or sort of interpreted as expression in different scenarios. And the real problematic scenarios are when faked images are interpreted as evidence and, reach wide audiences at the speed and scale of social media, to the point that, it's really hard to not talk about them, right? Because they must be addressed. In terms of, I guess what we've seen thus far, a lot of the times the deep fakes, these faked videos made with machine learning techniques that we've seen being spread and talked about in the media are ones that are primarily expressive. But there are more and more examples of these videos that exist on pornography sites and to lesser degrees over social media, but they still do exist. And these are videos, they can be of public figures, but sometimes they aren't.
Yeah. Now, obviously, machine learning, artificial intelligence systems, these are all being used to great effect to create these things. Now we're seeing these systems being created to detect them. How effective are they? How much should humans be involved in this process? I know there's a lot of work right now around AI being able to detect, the subtleties of a deep fake and be able to determine that this is in fact a fake. And this is a big push. It's kind of part of the warfare against the potential damage of these things. But are we headed in the right direction as far as those systems are concerned, in your opinion?
Right. And so this is one of the big things that we talk about also in the report. Most of these AI detection mechanisms work to detect deep fakes at the point of capture. So whether or not something, has been deep faked, they don't really address how things are disseminated or used as evidence. And indeed, there's no artificial intelligence mechanism that I've seen thus far that can determine how people will interpret some faked images as evidence and others as protected free expression. And this is sort of the issue that this report gets at. While technical fixes, determining pixels and, whether or not something's been faked or where it comes from is useful, but it doesn't go that far in terms of, stopping the spread of harmful images necessarily.
Right. Now, another term that's coming up a lot in a whole variety of facets in the world of technology is regulation. Everything appears to be in the target of regulation right now, or at least people seem to think that that's the solution for a lot of control over parts of technology that maybe they're afraid of or that are just growing so rapidly that they don't know what else would be effective. What do you think? Do you think deepfake technology should be regulated? And if so, what should or would that law look like in order to be at all effective at this point?
So this may not be an incredibly popular opinion, but I think deepfake technology is something that should be regulated only in tandem with the regulation of larger platform companies that have, gained a lot of economic power by making it so that, viral novel videos are rewarded by achieving massive speeds and scales. And I think that any sort of meaningful regulation would have to hold these different tech companies accountable for the way that they do incentivize maybe, bad faith sharing of content.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would probably share your opinion as far as that's concerned. We're seeing a lot of the damage that can be done through just the sheer network effect, and these things in collaboration with each other. Man, it just really seems like it's a messy soup. Britt, I really appreciate you taking time. I know that you have to go. Datasociety.net is where people can go to find your report. Again, the title of the report is Deepfakes and Cheap Fakes. Everybody should definitely take a look at it. If you're at all interested in this emerging technology, it's definitely a great report to read through. Britt, where do you want people to find you online if they want to follow the work that you're doing?
Sure. They could follow me on Twitter at DrBrittParis, Dr. Britt Paris.
Awesome. Britt, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it, and best of luck.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
I will never fall for the you as Megan trick again, now that I know how to detect.
Yes, for now at least. Who knows how effective those systems are going to be.
That's true. Your deepfake technology is going to improve.
It just keeps getting better.
And I'm never going to know. Like, next thing I know, Ant's going to be sitting here and we'll be like, are you Ant or are you Micah?
You won't even know if you're you. You'll be going, is this me or is this a deepfake?
That's next level
stuff. It's all a simulation.
Simulation.
Just like this episode.
So that is it. That's what we got for you, those 4 interviews. But we have so much more for you because we record this show every Thursday and plan to do so throughout 2020 and beyond. So the next time we're here, it's going to be a new decade. Wow. And I'm really curious to see what defines this decade moving forward.
How will we begin the decade?
Yeah.
With a bang, a pop,
or a fizzle.
Or a fizzle. Yes, we'll see.
We'll certainly find out. Twit.tv/TNW is where you can go to subscribe to this show so that you don't miss a single episode in 2020. You can find our audio, video, whatever format you prefer can be found there.
You can, of course, be a part of the show by emailing us at tnw@twit.tv. That is, of course, where you can also send your banana puns for inclusion in future episodes.
Thank you for that.
And follow us on social media. That's at Twit on Twitter. That's at twit.tv on Instagram. That's at Twit Talk on TikTok, TWITTOK. And if you want to tweet at me, I'm at Mikah Sargent on Twitter and Mikah Sargent on most of the social platforms.
Man, do you remember a couple of weeks ago when we did that whole
thing about
alliteration
the teas?
around the T's? I still can't get over it. It's still
It's
very
still
distracting to me.
Yeah.
I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everybody who helps us do this show each and every week. Jeff, John, Jeff, Burke, Colleen, literally everyone that works here in the office and in the studio have helped us in some way or another. And we appreciate you in 2019, and we will continue to appreciate you in 2020. And that's it for this time. We'll see you next year or next week, depending on how you look at it, on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Ow.
And Q Berry for 2020.
Come on, Barry. Come on, Barry.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah,
hi,
Barry.
Barry. Ew.
It's okay.
Okay.